right, well, thank you for being here today. I think I'll get us started because, as you may have noticed in the title, Human Workforce in the Post-AI Era, we have a huge topic which we couldn't possibly fully address in this session. I think a lot of people spend their career trying to address this topic. But what I was hoping we could do today is walk through some of the key issues and how they tie together, taking into consideration some of the amazing expertise we have on the panel today. So what I want to do, I'm going to jump right in because these are the folks you really want to hear from. Let me help folks just in terms of knowing who you're hearing from. We have them in the order of the screen. So it's Steve, Charles, Ulrik, and then Michal. And that way we can go right into the conversation. What I thought I would do is pose a question that's very broad in nature to get us going, and hopefully it'll let you guys each give a little context from the vantage point you have, like how you're coming at some of this issue, and then we'll delve into some more specific questions. That general question is just, talk to me about AI in general. Where do we think it's working today in this context of the workforce, the way we're preparing people to be in the workforce, the educational systems? How is AI being used today? Where is it effective? Where are there holes? Those kind of things.
Sure. So we're in the talent acquisition business, right? So we help companies identify top talent out of big pools of candidates they probably have access to. So the way we think about AI is, number one, our fuel is data. So we need a lot of data. And from an application standpoint, what it means from a talent acquisition, in the talent acquisition world, is where the more repeatable the job, the easier it is for us to apply AI. The less repeatable the job, the harder it is. So if you come to us with the comment or with the background or the title of consultant, I can apply that to many different worlds. If you come to us with the title of nurse, there's a lot of data on nurse, and there's a clear career trajectory of nurse, and we can identify pretty quickly what that career trajectory is going to look like because we have access to data and we can mash on the data. Consultants tougher because there's many different types of consultants.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
So, our work is to bring machine learning to helping improve educational outcomes at scale, sort of making the most of the world's learning data. And in the context of driving higher education improvement, what that ends up meaning is trying to be thoughtful about the sorts of things that algorithms are good at spotting and the sorts of things that people are good at spotting. I think generally, we'll talk a lot more about this as we go ahead, but I think generally the presumption that all machine learning and AI ultimately leads to automation is a mistake. I think there are certain kinds of tasks that combine, not just a confidence in our ability to predict them consistently, but also a level of risk that really define where processes may always be manual, where they're likely to be augmented, and where ultimately they may be automated. So in our world, much of the work that we're doing in supporting educational institutions is really about augmentation. So letting algorithms spot the things that algorithms are great at spotting, and then putting that data and insight in the hands of educators and of students themselves so that they can make better decisions. I think we're seeing that frame be something that's likely to be relevant to the way artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of progresses.
And with educators, you're particularly focused in the higher ed area for
yourself? Yeah, we're focused in higher education on driving improved persistence and graduation rates, and we have tools that are used by students themselves, by advisors, by faculty, and by administrators to make better decisions, kind of augmented with intelligence from the analysis we do.
Great. Ulrik?
So I've been spending about 25 years on the softer side of this. I started working in human factors in medicine. In general, what we found is that the application of AI doesn't have nearly the impact that you could hope for. Even if you take it at a slightly broader scale. We do use a lot of intelligence technologies that are not technically AI. And it's predominantly been in the content curation side of the house. We've built products that, together with McGraw-Hill, that between Area 9 and McGraw-Hill, probably used by 14 million students or so, about 2,000 courses. So we've had enormous amounts of data to play with and to try to apply some of these technologies and methodologies on. We do a lot of AI in other domains. We have a company that does that as well. But the impact for the learner and for the teacher has been relatively disappointing, except in a few very targeted areas. And that's actually not based on the newest breakthroughs in machine learning. It's something which is more the application of other kinds of intelligence, algorithms, and other kinds of advanced computer science. As an example, you do need very sophisticated technology to give feedback on simulated performances. So if you make mistakes in a simulator where you try to treat a patient on the screen, it's actually pretty hard to analyze that performance and give a physician with 10 years experience good feedback on that. In those cases, it's actually been pretty effective. But in terms of predicting what people should do next, things like that, it hasn't had nearly the impact that you could hope for. And it's because we lack training data. Even if we have data at scale, we still have the problem that it's really hard to have reliable outcome measures that we can use to train these algorithms.
And Michal?
We're in Symbolab, where we're helping students learn math. So we're in the edtech business. We're using machine learning and AI in two aspects. One, we've managed to solve any problem with the steps from simple arithmetic through complex integrals. And this helps, we're helping more than 60 million students worldwide. And this really works. Now it's easier for them to learn math. We're reducing the math anxiety. And it's just incredible what we can do with a small team building these super machine learning algorithms. The other aspect of it is personalized learning. It's really, really important that we can address each student personally, because math is different than other topics. Not only you have your preferences and learning style, but also math is built of learning of layers and building blocks. So it's important to identify the weaknesses and strength of each student. And also we're utilizing machine learning there, and it's working very, very well.
So maybe what I can do to try to disentangle and compartmentalize some of the conversation, because we've got a lot of things that you all put out there. Let's start by seeing if we can talk, if you think about the broader picture, you've got kind of the people involved. What skills do they have? How do they learn? And what do they learn? And then we have kind of the workforce and the economic graph. I think, Charles, you put this nicely when we were talking earlier. Kind of the economic graph meeting the academic graph. There's going to be, so let's start with the people side, and then the second conversation we'll move to is kind of the workforce side, what's the demand, et cetera. So if I go to that, the learner, many of you probably saw President Crow from ASU this morning with some of the video talking about the personalized learning agent. Talk to me about what we think students should learn. I mean, I'm guessing implicit in some of the work you do, Michal, you think math is important. You can talk about how they're learning, are they learning the right things, and then even get into the discussion around, is STEM everything? Coding skills, I mean, see we had Deco buying General Assembly. Coding is going to be the thing, or is there this other category, the soft skills, the human side? So feel free to start weighing in, because I know there's really different opinions about where we should be putting emphasis right now.
Well, I can actually say that even though I'm not in secondary and post-secondary education, I'm in talent acquisition for corporations, because this is an education conference with a background in education. So we're all familiar with, you remember like Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive knowledge that we all learned about, right? Right. So if you think about the bottom of that pyramid, right, it's rote generalization, it's rote memorization, it's regurgitating facts, and then you get to application and you get to evaluation, you get the synthesis at the top. So AI is kind of chasing us up that pyramid, right? So from a learner's perspective, the more rote, the more memorization, it's easier to apply AI to that, and it's easy to get to individualized learning plans, if you will, of applying AI to that path. When you get to evaluation and synthesis, it becomes much more difficult generally.
Okay.
So my view on that is that this is not a matter of either or. Like when I grew up in Europe in the 70s and 80s, we thought we could do radical surgery on the curriculum, basically just cut out things, and the logic was, because we would all have access to a calculator, you didn't need to learn multiplication tables, which I think is pretty clear now that logic doesn't work. Because the thing is that yes, computers can do a lot of these base Bloom level things automatically, but it's still inefficient for us as humans when we are to perform, either train or later perform at the higher order learning objectives, or when we practice collaboration in the context of our job. If we don't have the automaticity of those base level learning objectives. And that's one of the things we've seen through a lot of the work we've done at McGraw-Hill, is that you can't cut these curricula too far down, because you end up being with professionals talking circus language to each other. And it's not just terminology, it's much, much deeper than that. I was sitting at a morning conference. I'm advising a state into how to improve patient safety and improve their learning system. So I was sitting at a morning conference for interventional cardiologists, and the condensity of those conversations, the fact that you can cover things in 2 minutes, because behind every single word, every single expression is an entire set of things that we all agree upon. Those things still have to be learned. And I think machine learning, AI, adaptive learning, all these things can help condense the amount of time it takes to get to automaticity and free up the time we currently don't have in the system today. I highly recommend, I've been working with Harvard's Center for Curriculum Redesign that's built this framework called four-dimensional education that OECD is also adhering to now. And I think it's important to say that if you have knowledge, skills, character, and then meta-learning around it, currently the system is completely consumed by the knowledge domain. The knowledge domain is, and we can't even cover what we're trying to teach. If we can get that down to just freeing up 10% of the time for those 21st century skills, those advanced, the synthesis, that kind of stuff, that's not where we apply the AI. We apply the AI as a way to get to free up the time. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I think I would agree that we tend to sort of overemphasize the likelihood of some sort of binary outcome here, right? Like everything that can be automated will be automated ultimately, and therefore either STEM is everything or STEM is nothing. There's no question that the truth is it requires both a different, I would say an incremental set of skills from a literacy perspective. I think data literacy is dramatically more important than it was historically because there's just a lot more of it.
Would you say it's more important than, say, coding? I mean, we've heard people say coding should be taught as if it's a second language.
I think technical literacy and data literacy are both going to be essential going forward. Not that learning a particular coding language is going to protect you from anything, but I think in terms of content domains, being data literate, being technically literate, and then being literate in what it means to be a human being, i.e. communication skills, user interface design skills, the kinds of things that are going to be increasingly important going forward. On the other side, there are things that are very unlikely to ever be fully automatable, certainly within the lifetime of anybody who's on this planet now. Things like systems level thinking of the highest order, cultural sensitivity. Like there are other kinds of issues that might be critical thinking in the sense of the kind of classic liberal arts education. You can't have one of those sets of things or the other. If you want to be prepared, I think, to respond and react to those things that are augmented versus automated versus manual in the future, you've got to have both of those sort of major bases covered.
I think the two major disciplines that will have to be taught are STEM. These are the people who will build the engineers, data scientists, that will build the robots of the future, machine learning. And I think that, yes, there are problems now, but it's a matter of time when most of the things will be automated. Maybe it's not ready now, but we're getting there really quickly. And the other thing is the social and communications and soft skills. It's also important because for now, at least, it's very hard for machines to show empathy or to deal with complex situations. And there is also creativity, but I don't want to talk about that because that's a huge topic. What is creativity?
Well, in fact, you raised the question I was just about to take us towards, and it moves us closer to where the rubber meets the road. It's what we're learning versus what's in demand in the marketplace. Does anybody see evidence that people are saying, I am looking for a super creative systems thinker and show me people scored on that? Like, are we getting the pull from the market? I mean, I know we all like to say that, and we're talking about 21st century skills, but when people are hiring, you look at what's still classically on a resume or what's still classically in your academic profile. Are we getting closer? Do you see that changing?
In no time soon. So in the general labor force, we still hire for jobs against job descriptions or job requisitions. There's just the way that corporations work. And corporations, especially large corporations, they have innovators dilemma even this space. So it takes them a long time to move, right? So these are generational shifts that'll occur. So I have not seen in my 20 years of doing this a resume or a job requisition that says looking for a systems thinker. Like that just doesn't happen. Yep. We see strong communication skills. We see strong relationship skills, those soft skills we talk about. And so what machines are really good, if you give me a pile of 1,000 resumes against the job description, I can tell you the 880 people not to interview, but I can never tell you who to hire, right? Because hiring is about what we're doing right now. It's about voice intonation and body language and eye contact. And can I work shoulder to shoulder with that person from a cultural perspective? Machines just aren't there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet.
I think, Charles, you were giving me some interesting data I didn't know, even like with the UK putting out some challenges, I think, around outcomes from from universities and courses that are
Yeah.
effective or not. Can you share some of that? Because I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that's happening in higher education broadly, and there are lots of folks having this conversation at events like this, is a discussion around really what the social purpose and mission of a higher education infrastructure is. And to your point about coding academies, I think it's easy to get, again, binarily or myopically focused on a particular skill set that is showing up in the most job descriptions, versus trying to figure out how do we create an educated citizenry, which we may not have done the world's best job of, and how do we actually put our students in a position where they'll be able to react and respond, because none of us has any earthly idea what the world looks like 25 years from now, no matter how confident we may seem to be. So I think in the UK as an example, generally they're much more comfortable with sort of centralizing data on things like academic outcomes and in things like labor market outcomes as well. We tend culturally in the US not to like giant tracking systems that have lots of personal data about us all in one place. They're more okay with it in the UK, I think, largely because funding has tended to flow from the government directly to institutions historically rather than through students. And so one of the things that they're talking about over there that may come of that is when you've got a really explicit connection between completion of particular academic programs at particular institutions and economic outcomes at scale from those who completed those programs, you're much more likely to have a scenario where programs that don't deliver strong economic outcomes may cease to exist. The government could just decide that they're not going to support them or fund them anymore, which again, I think strikes at this heart of what is it that we're trying to create? Are we focused on what happens from the graduates of a program in terms of 5-year total earnings, 10-year total earnings, 15-year total earnings, or are there a broader set of outcomes that we're trying to instill as part of our post-secondary education system?
Yeah, and let me put a question to the group that I actually find I worry a lot about, and there's a phrase I kind of coined called the polymath paradox. So especially if you're trying to push for innovation, for really getting to be innovative thinkers, you don't yet know what the end goal is. You just know what the question is, and you want to pursue it. So you need people who think very broadly. Again, some of your analogy to the top level of the pyramid. And if you need that, so the polymath paradox is, again, polymath, kind of a Renaissance person who's broad and understands a lot of categories so they can pull from a lot of experience. And we're saying more and more we need those people. We need people see the patterns across disparate groups and to bridge between industries or disciplines. And yet we don't train them well, we don't hire them well, we don't promote them well, and we even have a hard time identifying or quantifying that that's who that person is. So are we setting ourselves up for kind of a random walk towards the things that are measurable, which almost by definition sometimes steer us away from this 21st century thinking, systems, design-centered person? Is there anything that's filling that gap? Or are our systems, almost the way President Crow was talking this morning about, is the design of the way our system works pulling us away from that, even though we're talking about we need it?
There are some major trends out there that are going in the right direction. I don't know whether you're familiar with Mastery Transcript Consortium, where 160 of the top high schools in the country has joined forces to establish a new transcript that is actually not based, where you're not getting admitted to the top university based on your ACT or your SAT score, but actually based on the competences you've been able to assemble in your portfolio. That's the right direction, to be able to measure things in a different way than we've done in the past, because the ACT doesn't tell you anything about how good of a collaborator you are, but if you've been able to come up with a great business case, build a prototype product in a group, and you've actually gotten it to work as part of your high school curriculum, there is a really strong indication that you can work in a group. And I think that if we change the goalpost and the way we measure the students, I think, and allow to do that, I think those are the steps in the right direction.
I agree with that. I think assessment and instrumentation of the learning process has to evolve along with our ability to ingest data and make sense of that data against those outcomes. And so we're seeing some higher ed institutions. University of Central Oklahoma is doing some really fascinating work in a program they call Stellar, where they're literally mapping sort of 21st century skills as manifest across a number of different courses in the curriculum, and basically automatically generating a portfolio for their graduates that they can move forward and advance in internships, in courses, in project work, all of which put them in a dramatically better position, and they're now collecting data around that to get that first job and to make progress post that. So I think we have to assess an instrument differently in order to take full advantage of what's available from a machine learning perspective. We've got to be able to get to that set of outcomes to measure
I
against.
think the schools are not ready yet. They're not there yet. There is a huge gap between what's happening out there and how kids observe information, how they think, what they do, because they learn everything from YouTube. Like, they don't really need the knowledge that is being transferred in school. And school is still about knowledge instead of about critical thinking and creativity and teamwork and all that. That's the future. That's what we need our kids to do. And it's kind of our responsibility. We're accountable for that, to teach them critical thinking, because they don't learn that in school. They are definitely not learning it when they watch videos on YouTube. And who's going to tell them what's right and what's wrong? What about all the moral things and everything that is expected from them? Now, coming from startups, in the startup world, it's like a mini universe. That's how you measure people. You need creative people. You need people who can do multitasking and be good in multidisciplines. So,
so being on the receiving end of the product that these good people produce in the labor market and working with corporations, I think what these panelists have said is exactly right. So if you look at the labor market generally and this kind of jobless recovery that we had, or this really long recovery we had, this was the longest recovery from a recession that we've ever had, and we had this deep recession. And a lot of that is because that corporations generally are just not rehiring those people back because those people have been automated out of a job. So what's happened is that, you know, the old adage that software is eating the world? So that's true. So a lot of the jobs that these folks had, those jobs are no longer existing because these rote memorization, these classic kind of repeatable jobs, software is eating those jobs, whether it's classic kind of automation software or it's the machine learning kind of AI stuff that we do. So in order to solve that problem, we have to train our kids to be thinking more critically as opposed to be thinking in the kind of the classic kind of rote way that we used to think.
Yeah, so let me keep us going on that. That's probably a good segue into the workplace side of things. So first thing I want to do is do just a rapid fire question across the panel. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do it for everybody. So raise your hand if you want to weigh in on this. So if we assume that the premise is right, that AI is dramatically going to, and machine learning and automation is going to dramatically change the demands in the workforce and opportunities, do you think that's something that's going to hit us in a dramatic way in the next 5 years, in 5 to 10 years, or is it still decades out, like Secretary Mnuchin and others might say? So how many people that think that we're going to have to raise the warning flag and say it's in the next 5 years that there's a dramatic shift? Anybody? Okay. How about in 5 to 10 years? Okay, about half and half. How about 10 years plus? Okay, why don't we start with you, because you can argue with the audience.
So I raised my hand twice.
Oh,
because
okay.
I think it's a more nuanced problem than just to say, is AI going to change the world? It's going to change part of the world really soon, which is already happening. And there are some things where there will be a very slow adoption. Yes, 1.6 million truck drivers will very soon be out of a job. And that's a very clear and very present problem. On the other hand, it's not going to change the hospital world dramatically in terms of the labor market there for the next 10 years or so. There are some things that will be radically better, but if you look at the amount of progress Watson has made in the amount of time and the amount of noise around it and how little impact it is destined to have the next 5 years, it's a much, much longer play. So I think it's a matter of realizing that there are hammers out there and there are nails out there, and there are screws, and we do not necessarily have screwdrivers yet. So the thing here is, I don't think AI and machine learning is going to change everything dramatically, but it will change some things.
Yeah. So because I know that we have some difference of opinion here, let's take the medical profession as an example. What do you think is going away? Jobs will be automated and what won't? And again, I know, Michal, you had a opinion on this when we were talking.
Yeah, I think looking at Watson is one thing, but if you look at all the startups that are building things, and not everyone is aware of what's going on, and if you're, instead of looking at something that is very generic, just building machine learning around one topic is much easier than trying to solve this big AI, the more generic AI that is, we're not there yet. So things like medical diagnostics or surgeries using augmented reality. All this is happening now. And these jobs will be eliminated. Still, there will be doctors explaining the medical outcome, and it's not that doctors will not be needed, but it's getting there.
I think there's a framework here that's not super complicated to try to understand where, again, this spectrum of sort of always manual to fully automated is likely to exist. So if you think of it as a 2x2, and you've got level of risk on one axis, and you've got the confidence of our ability to predict on the other axis, things that are high risk, low confidence, in other words, low predictability, are likely pretty much always going to be manual at some level, right? Things that are low risk, high predictability, are automatable today. And
I assume you don't mean risk to the employee, because those are the ones we're
the
trying
risk
to
of
automate. You mean
making
the
a
risk
bad
of-
decision,
Yes.
right? Which is why the medical profession is going to be one of the last places in which we do it. Like the risk for just take, as an example, AI and machine learning that people are very familiar with, Netflix and Amazon. Most of what both of those algorithms recommend to you is not a good recommendation, and you know it at a glance. The level of risk of being recommended a movie that you're not even going to watch is very low, or a product that maybe you should think about buying that actually you have no interest in buying, extremely low, right? But buying behavior is actually relatively predictable. So that is an automated algorithm. It's already here. It's been here for a while. It's learning and it's getting smarter, but it's because it's low risk and highly predictable over a huge data set.
So are
that
we
makes
now
that
going to be in
possible.
a phase where we have the equivalent of these partially self-driving cars? We have the driver sitting
That's
in
what
the
we
car
have today.
watching
That's
around?
right.
That's what we have
But how
today,
long are we going to
augmentation.
sit through this, like, we'll hedge our bet? Like, where are we in that for the workforce?
My take on this is that singularity is not coming. Right? We're not, singularity isn't here. It's not coming anytime soon. Right? We don't have to worry about robots taking over the world. Right? But generally speaking, so what we see in the labor market, and then everybody here probably has a college degree, but half the labor market is folks with high school degrees or less, right? And that's a lot of that's the blue collar world. So folks are like, oh, the blue collar world's going away. They're being automated out. That's not completely true either. And some knowledge workers are being automated out of jobs. And it's a slow process. So for an example would be like a construction worker. There's no robot, there's no set of repeatable robots today that are going to go build houses for you that are on custom spec in some suburban location. Those are real people, blue collar jobs, banging hammers against nails, against wood to build homes. They're not going away anytime soon. Even in generations, they're not going away. However, the architect that actually designed that house, who's a knowledge worker, that person could be going away quicker than the person who's actually hammering in the nail. Because
Let me
the
challenge
architect
you a little bit.
because
There's a
the
3D
architect-
printer that can print a house.
I was just headed there.
Okay.
Right? I was just headed there.
Keep going.
I was just headed there. So until we get to a place where 3D printers are big enough to print a house, right, then I don't think we have to worry about that part. But it is true that if you're an architect and you're working on a classic suburban subdivision where you have all these repeatable houses, we can use software and AI to kind of solve that problem. Right, so it's not just a blue collar or a white collar thing. It's not just you can't apply it as a broad brush across the entire labor market. It really is so specific to the job, and it's incremental at best.
Do you think it over-indexes for blue collar work or knowledge worker? Like it disproportionately hits?
I think it's about repeatability. I think it's
so independent variable.
I think it's an
And
independent.
predictability,
Right.
not just
And predictability.
Yeah, physical environments are incredibly difficult to predict, right? A random physical environment like a spec house on a piece of land is an incredibly difficult environment to teach a machine to operate in effectively. It's why getting robots to move the way people do is actually way harder than getting them to dominate people at chess. And the inverse of that was presumed 20, 30 years ago, right? Chess was defining of human intelligence, and we would certainly have robots that basically looked and moved and talked like people way before they could actually beat us at chess.
Then there is an even more complex system out there called the human being. And biology, all these situations is way more complex than a house or these very complex engineering things, which is why there is I don't think there is any chance that there will be taken more than a decimal point of a percentage of the work out of the hands of the surgeons anytime soon. There are very, very few examples of completely automated surgery out there. What is happening is that they're improving patient safety, they're improving the cost efficiency, they're making new methods. So the thing is, we're expanding the scope of what humans can do with technology, but we are not using it to, like, it's not threatening the jobs of the surgeons or the nurses. Yeah. And it's whenever we asked about, or I'm asked about whether teachers will go away because of the technologies we're building, it's like the other way around. It's like if we can make the ROI on another hour paid for a teacher better, meaning if we can spend that human thinking that the teacher can provide to the education system in a better way than marking math homework, of course there will be a bigger appetite to invest that money. And it's exactly the same thing that has happened in healthcare the last 50 years. We have many times more technology in healthcare than we had in the past. And we have a lot bigger need for physicians because we've been able to expand the scope of what we've been capable of doing. And to be honest, right before I started med school, physicians were still tasting patients' urine to try to figure out if they have diabetes because it gets sweet. We don't do that anymore. It improves the quality of living for a physician, I guarantee you that. And it didn't take any physicians out of jobs. But there is a bigger need today because we can do more things. And I think that's exactly what will happen in a lot of the human and biology-related domains.
Said another way, there's a futurist who I love who was asked the question as to whether ultimately computers would replace teachers. And the answer was any teacher who can be replaced by a computer should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing about being a doctor,
Yeah.
right? If you're a doctor who can be replaced by a machine, you should not be a doctor. And the same thing is true of teaching, I think. And ultimately, the underappreciated quadrants in this 2x2 matrix are the augmented, which is going to be the vast majority of everything, right? We're obsessed with things that can either only be done manually or are going to be fully automated, like imminently. And the reality is that that kind of augmentation is what's going to be dramatically more transformative, which is why, as educators, it's important that we figure out how to help build the right sets of skills to help participate in that augmentation in a beneficial way.
But I think that what will happen is the job of a teacher will change drastically, more than the doctor, because doctors still need to understand the terminology and to translate what the machines are recommending. Where teachers, it will have to change completely because being knowledgeable will not be what's expected from teachers. It will be more to learn, to prepare the kids for the future.
I'm not sure I agree with that, because one of the things we've found over the last 25 years is that practicing these 21st century skills, practicing character traits, is something that needs to happen in the context of your professional domain, which means that the teachers need to be able to both master the knowledge and be able to support and help the people use it in a context of collaboration, creativity, and other kinds of 21st century skills.
But the machines have the knowledge. The teacher has to know how to use it and how to apply it, because that's what you want to teach the kids. You want to teach them how to learn, not how to memorize things and how to be more knowledgeable.
The younger age, the more I agree. So if you take lower school, where already today it's very much a matter of how you interact, they're already quite far there. But if you look at middle school and up and in the professional environment, I think it's highly unlikely that you can teach collaboration and teamwork generically and expect it to transfer to the professional domain. Just because you're good at playing soccer in a team doesn't mean you're great at solving problems with your colleagues. So I do think that in order to get to that meaningful practice of 21st century skills and the character traits and growth mindset, these other things, I think it's highly important that it happens in the context of your professional domain. And if that is to happen, the facilitator's need cannot be generic. And we have a great example at University of Copenhagen from the late 90s, where they tried to move to problem-based learning too fast. They brought in a biochemist to teach integrated learning of medicine. And then we asked for what the X-ray showed, and she was blank because she was not a physician. She didn't know how to tell us what the X-ray for that patient showed, which meant that the entire thing was a farce. So I actually am much more skeptical whether you can take out that base level of knowledge and think that you can go straight and make the shortcut straight to these skills.
I don't think you can make shortcuts, or you have to. I'm just saying that you can take the knowledge from the internet. So the teacher, like a good example will not be like if the teacher is an expert in history. It's how do you acquire this skill to show the kids so she can learn with the kids together, or project-based learning, and not being an expert in a domain. It's different learning to become a doctor. That's after high school. But in high school, you need to learn how to learn.
So
That's
I mean,
what
I think you can carry this all the way through to the workplace. Like, what are we going to be hiring for? Do I
Yes.
want a generally talented, creative thinker who can go learn from the internet or from their colleagues the domain expertise? And so I think there's a lot of open question on where to go. And one way to test it, let me see if I can force some concrete examples here. So let's just take the middle of where half the room and the other half voted, whether it's 0 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years, there is a real shift coming. Let's just call it 5 years. So 5 years means that let's have you pretend that you're talking to a junior in high school today. And they're making decisions about what they're going to go study, what career path they think they should go on, because they want to intersect as they come out of college. Let's just say it's a 4-year program to make the problem easy. So what would you tell them not to become? And again, I know the answer, follow your passion, do what you like. Let's just generically say they like what you're going to suggest. So it's not let's just take that variable out. Do you say, don't even think about becoming an accountant? This is the kind of thing you don't do. How do you tell them to spend their time? Make it a little more concrete, because this is, in psychology, there's a thing called the Barnum effect, where it's, I can say an expression like, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And everyone's like, yeah, that's true. I kind of feel that sometimes. And you go, yeah, out of sight, out of mind. And you're like, yeah, that seems true also, right? And so I'm trying to figure out how, both those would be wise sayings to pass along, and yet we've kind of got a mix of everything going on.
So I fall much more personally on this side of you've got to go deep in a domain. I think we're going to start talking less about big data and more about deep data. And I think what our minds are brilliant at is the synthesis of information and the identification of patterns in that information. And there is relevance to those things as long as you go deep in something specific. Now, I bought an education business when I graduated from college for debt, and I've only ever worked in education ever since then. And I learned that lesson from my father, who started 60 different businesses in about 59 different industries, and just about none of them worked, because he never learned enough about any one thing to have, I think, a level of insight to be able to
So you tell some junior in high school, just work through the experience of going deep in something.
Yeah,
that you can build the muscle of going deep in something.
I think there's something to do where you're trying to find the intersection of things that you're interested in, things that you're good at, and things that the world values and needs more of. And if you can find the intersection of that Venn diagram, then chase that as hard as you can, because things like data literacy and technical literacy are going to be most relevant and most impactful in the context of some depth of domain expertise. That's why systems thinking doesn't show up in resumes, because they're actually looking for people who, in many cases, know something about that domain. That will make you better at all of those jobs if you can deploy 21st century skills against a domain that's got some.
It's quite different with technology. Because when I was out of school, there was no such thing as machine learning, not to mention deep learning, and the ability to learn all the time, to keep learning, that's what I'm looking in when I'm hiring, because that's what I had to go through. So you need a very, very strong foundation. I'm not sure if it's a deep thing or it's just a strong foundation in STEM, for instance. Math and physics and computers and programming, but you need to be able to learn very quickly, because it's changing all the time.
But I'm not hearing you say psychology and philosophy and anthropology. And I mean, like, so I would, again, you're giving advice to a junior in high school, so this seems a little high level still. What do you say?
I would say those are the important ones. I think it is table stakes to get automaticity on STEM. Basically, not have to think, but I don't think STEM is the goal. STEM is a tool in the toolbox that allows you to actually practice the things that makes us human. It's an intermediate step to free up more time than we spend today on ethics discussion, on moral discussions, morality, resilience, but also like deliberate practice as an example, being able to learn, being able to be cognizant about how you learn so that you can quickly modify your skill set when you go into a workplace that will have to retool your skill set. So I think the soft side is critically important to have more focus on already early, because that's the thing that sets us apart from things that can be automated.
And Steve, is the market clearing this concept?
Well, I would say, I'll be the naysayer here. I'd say follow your passion. Like and the reason I say that is because, so we've been talking about AI for 40 years, 50 years, since the 50s and 60s, and then it got really, really big for a while, and then it went away, then it got really, really big away, and then it went away, But it's not going away this time, and there's kind of one reason, and it's kind of It's Amazon, right? That's the reason. And the reason I say that, there's something called Amazon Web Services. Not retail Amazon where we get packages, but there's something called Amazon Web Services. And until there was a cloud that allowed us to get infinite computing power to pull in all this data, that we weren't able to do these infinite number of calculations, this n times n problem, in order to mash on all this data. We've only been able to do this for the last like 6 or 7 or 8 years. So all the startups that we talk about didn't have access to this infinite computing power at a really cheap price. So therefore they weren't around. So there's a lot more folks working on these problems, and it's only happened over the past 6 or 8 years. So we're in this research phase. And the thing about research, anybody that's familiar with how the PhD program works is that you don't know when the breakthrough is going to occur. You just keep doing the research. And I feel like we're still in this research phase when it comes to AI and machine learning generally. And I don't know where this thing's going to end. I'd love to be on this panel in 10 years and look back of having 15 years of real, AI research, of having infinite computing power and infinite, processing. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I think things are happening now, and again, more with startups like the driving automated cars and automated education. We have 60 million users. So things are happening. We're not doing research. We're not waiting for the research. There is something completely different. Like 1 of every 3 marriages started on the internet. So that's an algorithm that is matching people. Things are happening, and things are changing our lives and impacting our lives. So back to the question, what you should learn. So there are, again, the soft skills and the STEM. Both are important, but what side do you want to be on? The side that is shaping the future, building the robots, building the machine learning algorithms, or the side that is working alongside with the machines, soft skills and human interactions? So I'm not saying what's more important. I just know what side I want to be on and what side I want my daughter to be on. And just talking about that, there is a big problem to think about, that traditionally more men are going into STEM and engineering and data science and all that. And we expect women, or we push them towards human interactions and nurturing and nursing. And this is all important. But if we look into the future, what's going to happen? Because algorithms are actually now recommending to students what they should learn. So they're kind of biased. And there is the side that is building these algorithms, shaping the future, and there is the side that is kind of tag along.
Yeah.
So.
Steve, let me come back to you again just for one more question on this. What's the pull from the market side? And again, Charles, you may see it too, working with the universities and what they're trying to get as goals. But tell me more, what's been popular? Like, if you're seeing you're seeing more hiring in the university space, Charles. What are the degrees that people are focusing? Is there at least kind of trend lines that we're seeing?
For sure. So one of the things we do is we aggregate just about every job on the job market. So at any given time, there's about 5 million open jobs in the North American job market, and so we see every one of those jobs and we aggregate them and we use them in our work. There is no question that the STEM subjects are what we see folks looking for, companies looking for. And you see it, and you used to see it only from the Silicon Valley tech companies. But what we find now is that Morgan Stanley's hiring more engineers than they will any other discipline this year. Why is Morgan Stanley hiring more engineers than any other discipline this year? Well, they use it for many different ways, right? They use it for trading, right? They use it for their infrastructure. They use it across the entire business. I don't know if you guys have seen the GE ads of the past year, where they had kind of the geeky, engineer talking about how he got a job at GE and he's really proud of it. And the other engineers are looking at him like, why are you interested in working at GE? You're an engineer, right? So it's one of those things, right, where even all of those companies, all the mainline corporate old guard companies are hiring more in the engineering world than they are in any other discipline, generally speaking, unless they're growing like a weed and they're hiring more sales and marketing people. Yeah.
Well, this is one of the differences, I think, between just what time horizon you're describing, right? So if you're giving advice to a high school student, that's very different than having a conversation with someone who is in the job market right now, right? If your superpower is, I can work effectively with brilliant robots, it's a little too soon for you. Those brilliant robots don't exist yet. We still need the people to build those brilliant robots. So the question is, like, for how long is that going to be the biggest problem we have to solve? Versus, I'm trying to think here 15 years out, brilliant robots are here. By the way, our human nature is psychologically to always overestimate how much is going to happen in a short period of time and underestimate how much is going to happen over a longer period of time. So the number of us that think like there's some massive shift that's going to be binary in some way happening in the next 5 years, like we are in the midst of it. It's already happening. It's not going to be dramatically different 3 years from now than it is today, but 20 years from now it will be dramatically different, and that set of skills needed to work alongside the brilliant robot are going to be a lot more relevant than they are if you're trying to feed your family today.
Well, so maybe to wrap it up, I'll use the moderator's prerogative to put in one of my own personal biases as a way of concluding, which is I think there's so many open questions. It is hard to pin it down. You've got the time scale, you've got the different industries, you've got the different people you're working with. I would argue that probably a universal truth, I'd like to put out there, is that we need much more literacy, not just on the coding and everything else, but on probability and statistics. It's the underpinning for the data science. It's the underpinning when we're trying to address global level scales as opposed to I can handle these 4 people and it's a constrained environment. And I first started looking into this even when you had kind of the crowdsourcing conversations and wisdom of the crowds. And I would talk to executives. And I'd say, look, this is great. You got all these cool studies that come out. Like HP had done some work about predicting what their top line revenue number would be, and the crowd got it better than the little finance team. And I'd say, okay, that's great. What happens the day the CEO says, here's what we say our forecast is, and it's wrong? If they've used the wisdom of the crowds, and that's a predictive model that they were betting on, those models, probabilistically speaking, are good. So they did the right thing betting on the odds, but it came out with the wrong outcome. And the joke at the time, this was a good 8-10 years ago, is whose head's going to roll? So the idea that we have to mentally shift to we're dealing with probabilities, there will be errors. I think humans in general, it's a great shorthand to say we deal with 1, 2, and many. We don't have a concept of much else, right? And this notion of probability, I would go back to saying, if nothing else, that has to be infused into our conversation way more, because I think it's the underpinning of a lot of the work you do, a lot of the understanding of what's working and what's not and why. So I would throw that out there as a little tidbit at the end. But if you all wouldn't mind, please join me in thanking the panel for a fun conversation.